I spent my life trying to make my family's life better, only to realize that all I provided was material things and money. I'm not sure if I failed as a husband and father. At the very least, I've come to understand that love is much more than that. Welcome to the Love and Betrayed Love channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. I'm not sure what bothered me the most, the fact that I failed as a husband or father. I'm not sure if I was depressed or just furious, to say the least. It was a little confusing. I spent my entire life trying to make my family's life better, and all I ended up doing was providing them with things and money. It simply doesn't work. It quickly became clear that my sole responsibility was to fill the well I loved my wife and my children. Please keep in mind that this is all written in the past tense. I own my own business. Eric Carter and I grew up together. We'd been best friends since elementary school. Eric and I founded the company shortly after finishing vocational school, and it grew faster than we could have expected. So technically I should say that we run our own business. A few years later, both of us married our high school sweethearts. Life was good for the first 15 years or so. Everything was wonderful. The company was performing well. Eric and I both made decent salaries, and we had over 30 full-time employees. Eric and his wife Linda have 3 sons, Rebecca and I have twins, a boy and a girl. We both own mode-sized mansions and McMansions. We enjoyed dining out, relaxing vacations and expensive cars. Eric and I were very business-oriented. Business came first. We recognized early on the importance of keeping our clients satisfied. Even if our employees were not 1/3 of our top performers were ex-convicts. We hired them directly from the prison vocational school 8 years ago. Only 2 of the ex-con proved to be a problem, and the other ex-con quickly resolved it. They were doing well, and we're not going to let a few troublemakers ruin their lives. We contributed to several community programs and even sponsored a softball team. Unfortunately, my family situation was also unfair. My wife became socially active for a number of progressive causes. I wasn't thrilled with it, but she let me do my thing and I let her do hers. Politics were never a part of our family. We suddenly began discussing current events and political issues. I tried hard to avoid such conversations, but it was futile. The more I cut off or ignored her, the more determined she became. It was like watching CNN and Fox News simultaneously. I attempted to avoid her, but it was difficult, as my wife and I grew apart. For many years I had the same relationship with my children. I tried to engage my son, Daniel, in a variety of activities. I didn't care whether it was sports, hiking or hunting and fishing. All he wanted to do was play video games and, as I later discovered, I occasionally used marijuana. All of my efforts were futile, and my wife eventually advised me to just leave him alone and mind my own business. I would have resisted more, but my son smirked whenever she said it. My daughter Emily was a clone of her mother. She used to be Daddy's little angel, but now she barely recognizes me as her father. I couldn't count the number of piercings she had, despite being on birth control. She contracted gonorrhea twice. She enjoyed accompanying her mother to various political and social gatherings, but she would never consider going out for ice cream or pizza with her father. I also gave up trying to communicate with her. One of the most significant setbacks came when I refused to donate company funds to one of her initiatives. They wanted to give addicts clean needles to avoid infections from shared or dirty ones. Rebecca did not speak with me for a week. It was hard to believe things could get any worse. The company's holiday party was approaching. Eric and I insisted Rebecca and M&A take care of it. M&A was happy to oblige, but she had to drag Rebecca kicking and screaming to assist her. Within the past few months, Rebecca had been going out more and more frequently. She also went on overnight excursions to take part in various progressive activities. I wasn't sure whether they were protests, rallies or seminars. It did not matter. Daniel had switched from weed to pills. I wasn't sure what kind, but it didn't matter either. Emily now had her own website and vlogs. M&A did an excellent job at the Christmas party. She attempted to share the credit with Rebecca, but Eric and I knew better. We had beer, wine, but no hard liquor. We had 100 employee participation. I believe the annual bonuses had something to do with it. Rebecca and the kids were present, of course, but they did not appear to enjoy it as much as everyone else. There were no social gatherings, but there was an abundance of food. "John, I need to speak with you for a minute." Eric tried not to draw attention as we moved aside. "What is the matter?" I tried to speak casually to calm him down. "Carter needs to talk to you, but he's worried." "What do you mean?" "He doesn't want to ruin the party or upset you, but he feels there is something you should know." Hogg was one of our ex-cons. He had been with us for 6 years and we did not want to lose him. "Okay, bring him here. It's not going to be a problem, right?" Eric winced slightly. Jorge and his wife, Elena, appeared anxious. I smiled and tried to appear relaxed, hoping to put them at ease. Eric quietly departed. "Mr. Terrell, we do not want to cause any problems, but when my wife saw your wife today, she felt compelled to say something. I tried to talk her out of it, but she was adamant." I looked at his wife and nodded, indicating that she could proceed. She looked at George, nudged him with her elbow and motioned for him to speak. "Elena works at the Hampton Inn. She has been cleaning the 5th floor for the past 2 years. For the past year, your wife and a certain Mr. Walker have used room 511 once or twice per week. They usually stay for 2 to 3 hours in the same room." I was speechless. I had a million questions, but I didn't think now was the time or place to ask them. Elena appeared relieved that everything was out in the open, but George was extremely concerned. Not knowing how I would react, I simply took his hand in. Both of mine looked him in the eyes and said thank you. I smiled at Elena and motioned for them both to return to the party. George relaxed as I was leaving. I walked past Harry intending to give George a raise next month. Richard Walker was in charge of the city's parking operations. I didn't know him well, but I knew he'd been a public servant for nearly 20 years. He hoped to run for mayor someday. He married Evelyn Walker, the owner of one of the county's top real estate firms. She was a beautiful woman who enjoyed placing her advertisements on the sides of city buses. I wondered if she offered a special rate for that evening. My wife chastised me for leaving the party early. The kids weren't happy either. I simply smiled and returned to my reading. Mickey Spain can still read well, after 70 years. On Monday morning I waited comfortably for Walker's arrival at the Walker Real Estate office, where a secretary had prepared hot coffee and I had brought the big kill. She walked in around 10, stopped and took a moment to look at me. "I was wondering when you'd show up, Mr. Terrell. It took you long enough." I followed her into her office carrying my coffee with me. "I suppose if you own the company, you can set your own hours. Why didn't I think of that?" "John. May I call you John?" I nodded in agreement. "I am not going to rehash all of this drama, John. I just want to know what you intend to do. I have a lot of questions and I don't want you to mess anything up." This wasn't what I expected. I expected to deliver a grand revelation, boy. Was I mistaken? "Miss Walker. It appears that I'm quite behind in this matter. I hadn't even realized it myself. My friend just told me I don't know what to do next and I don't have anyone to confide in or discuss this with. To be honest, I assumed you were in the dark, exactly like me, John. I have known about this for over 6 months. I probably should have contacted you sooner, but I had a lot on my plate and didn't want you to ruin everything by doing something rash. By the way, call me Evelyn, what exactly do you mean by something rash?" "Oh, like playing Rambo with Kyle in public, maybe exposing them in an awkward way. It's difficult to predict what macho men will do when something like this occurs. I believe it will be far more effective if you approach it calmly. I've never considered myself macho. Well, what are your plans? How can I help you?" I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. "I believe we'll need more time over the next 2 weeks. Evelyn Walker and I became good friends over the last few months. Evelyn had systematically set her husband up. The IRS was extremely interested in his taxes. Evelyn had carefully separated her personal and business taxes from his. The state prosecutor was looking into how he diverted state funds meant for road construction and transportation to other unspecified projects. The city was looking into his use of municipal funds to pay for motel and restaurant expenses. What made this particularly interesting was her ability to persuade them all to cooperate in their investigations, so they all came together around the same time. However, none of these efforts improved my situation in any way. Nonetheless, she struck an intriguing deal to sell her real estate business. I might be able to accomplish something similar. My main issue was with my home family. I no longer had close relationships with my wife or children. I didn't want to leave the business, but it was necessary. Evelyn had a solution. About a month later, I announced that we were moving to a new home. Rebecca's ears perked up, but all I could hear from the kids were groans. They liked our house. Emily became interested when I mentioned the pool, and Daniel thought the 3-car garage would be cool. The trip to see the new home went well. It was twice the size of our current one and more than twice as expensive. Each child had their own bathroom. Alishan commented that we didn't have enough furniture to properly furnish the new place, but she seemed relieved when I told her she could buy everything new. She enjoyed the professional kitchen. To top it off, I informed them that we would all have new cars. For the first time in many years. I was an excellent father and husband. Evelyn did an excellent job finding me a new home. It took her only 2 days to complete all of the paperwork. When I told Rebecca that Walker Real Estate was handling the transaction for us, she got a little upset. Seth did not seem to accept it. Evelyn had already found a cash buyer for our old house. I found it interesting that my wife and her lover's wife were signing the documents at the same table. There were no phony niceties. We simply sat down and got to work on the paperwork. The first document to sign was for the sale of the old house. Rebecca and I signed everything Evelyn presented, and we then had it notarized. We earned $45,000 from the sale and transferred it to an electronic account. Rebecca felt fine and didn't pay much attention. She has just signed the new house. Documents came next. Rebecca smiled as Evelyn mentioned the price $90,000. She smiled again when I explained that I was putting the new house in her name for tax purposes. She thought it was an excellent idea. However, she failed to notice that it was not a purchase contract but rather an option to purchase. If she'd read the fine print, she would have realized that the option was for 120 days. If the purchase was not completed by then, the price would revert to $1 million and the $4,000 option fee would be forfeited. I didn't want to lose money, but in the end it was worthwhile. After everything was signed and notarized, Evelyn gave her the keys to her new home and congratulated her. It appeared genuine and I couldn't stop myself from laughing. Rebecca was fuming the entire way home. She had not expected me to actually register the house in her name. She also wasn't expecting to get a $1,000 gift card from our local upscale furniture store. It is sometimes necessary to spend money in order to earn money. The following day was car day. Daniel chose a Mustang. As I expected. Emily surprised everyone by choosing a lime green Kia Soul. Rebecca selected a white Lexus. I explained to both children the importance of establishing a credit line. They appeared to understand, making it easier to register both cars in their names and, of course, fully fund them. They didn't realize that someone would have to pay for the cars. I did the same for Rebecca's new Lexus. I insured all of the new cars for 90 days. The total out-of-pocket expenses for all 3 vehicles were just under $600. The majority of that went towards tags and titles, another worthwhile investment on my part. A week later we moved into our new home. The more Evelyn and I worked together, the closer we got. We met every day. Sometimes I helped her with a project and sometimes she helped me. It appeared that we were becoming very comfortable with each other. Eric was in charge of our welding business, while Evelyn had enough staff to run the real estate office. All of our efforts were aimed at ending our marriages. Evelyn intended to wait until Kyle was charged by one of the groups investigating him. She wasn't sure who would get to him first. She appeared to believe it didn't matter. My situation was slightly different. At some point I decided that I did not want a divorce. I had too much to lose, but I knew I needed to take action. I just wanted it to be over as soon as possible. Evelyn came to the rescue yet again. John, have you ever traveled to Aruba only as a port of call during a cruise? But I have never stayed there. Did you like it? I didn't spend enough time there to make a decision. Why are you asking? I have the opportunity to purchase a condominium in West Iran. You stopped for $1 million. Would you be interested in something like this? That could be a little tricky for me. I probably don't need anything so complicated. I assumed we could split the cost. I'm confident you could handle it. I am sure I could, but you are strong enough to handle it on your own. Why did you even consider including me in something like this? Consider this a partnership, in other words an investment. I consider myself a savvy businesswoman. I enjoy using other people's money. Besides, I enjoy your company. It piqued my interest. $500,000 will buy me in. I'll prepare the paperwork. You realize there will be paperwork, right? Absolutely. I was surprised that I agreed to live with a woman I had never had sex with. Now I was even more excited about the entire project. Eric and M&A were well aware of my issues with Rebecca and the children. They were willing to help in any way they could, without being intrusive. Eric, I have decided to sell my half of the business to you and M&A. That is very nice, John, but we cannot afford to buy out your share. I would love to, but as you know, it is impossible. Eric, how does 1,000 sound to explain? You don't need my assistance running the business. We're both aware that it's almost running itself at this point. I'm leaving soon and everything will fall on your shoulders. You will be the sole owner making all decisions. All you have to do is call me occasionally for advice. I see, said the blind man, and I assume there will be a consultation associated with this phone call. Eric replied, smiling. Consider it a lifetime annuity. Don't stress too much about it. Just make things easier on yourself. The company lawyer completed all of the necessary paperwork. Eric and M&A were concerned that I was overreacting, but I reassured them that everything was under control. It's great to have a friend you can trust. It appears amusing, but I never bothered to investigate Rebecca's affair with Kyle. I never felt compelled to obtain compromising photographs, emails, or phone messages. I would not have needed them. I hadn't planned on getting divorced. I planned to do what 21 of deadbeat dads do: just leave. 2 weeks later, Richard Walker was arrested. I don't even know who received the awards. He wasn't a big-time criminal or embezzler. He was just a petty civil servant who took advantage of others and messed with my wife. Evelyn and I had already parted ways before all the dirt was revealed. She sold her company 32 rental properties and 3 apartment buildings. She was embarking on a new life. I was her designated male toy. That is how she referred to me, and I did not find it offensive. We were able to solidify our relationship after arriving in Aruba, but we never went through the courtship stage. Everything seemed pre-arranged. I did not miss my children. Does this make me a bad father? Given the circumstances, I do not think so. I did not miss my wife. Does this make me a bad husband? I do not think so. Evelyn became an avid golfer. She tried to pique my interest, but there was no spark. She maintained a consistent group of women. She played 3 days per week. We met with him and about a dozen other former players several times per week to socialize. I quickly adapted to this situation. It was a new carefree lifestyle that was thoroughly enjoyable. I decided to take up painting to pass the time. I'd always wanted to do it. Every morning I'd head down to the docks and set up my easel. I wasn't particularly good at it. I would return to the apartment later and the first thing I would do was scrape all of the paint off the canvas to start over the following day. 3 months had passed, but I still had nothing to show for it. Evelyn found it rather amusing. I avoided making contact with anyone, but I felt compelled to call Eric. John. It is about time. I was beginning to lose faith in you. Have you settled in? I've settled in and feel better than ever. It was the best decision I've ever made. For the next 10 minutes, Eric and I discussed my new life in Aruba. I had no trouble convincing Eric to bring M&A here for a week or so. Everything was going well. Eric apologized for not sending consultation checks, but I'd forgotten to provide him with an address and bank account number. I didn't need the money anyway. Eric, I'm sorry to bring this up, but could you tell me about my wife and family situation? I don't know everything, but I will tell you what I know. It appears that things are not going well without you. First, Daniel was arrested. They discovered him with 3 kilograms of fennel in his car trunk. The car of course was seized, and because he was over 18 he was imprisoned. Rebecca couldn't help him out. That's all I know about it. That's unfortunate to hear. I know I am his father, but I honestly do not care what happens to him. I tried but failed. Emily's situation is not much better. Shortly after moving into her new home, she doubled her website traffic. According to what I've heard, she gained a lot of followers. Then one day she told her mother she was going to California to meet a producer guy. 2 weeks later they discovered her Kia abandoned in Memphis. Rebecca has not heard anything about her, since I assume you got most of this information from Rebecca. Yes, she regularly visits the office hoping to catch you. I can tell she doesn't believe me when I say you've left. She was furious last week when she received notice that she had to finalize the option on the house or vacate by the end of the month. Very clever, Eva, John. She was completely bewildered. Right now, I'm not sure what her intentions are. I believe some utilities have been cut off. She couldn't afford to pay her electric bill. Have you helped her? Don't be mad, John. I gave her $1,000 and instructed her to use it as a deposit on an apartment. I am confident she will spend it on something else, will you not? I felt bad for her. I chuckled a little. Okay, Eric, I understand. Simply deduct it from my next payment. By the way, can't her lover help her right now? Eric laughed. He's in worse condition than she is. All I know is what we see on television. There's nothing known about him right now, but juicy details emerge from time to time. I believe he is going away for a while. Oh, before I forget. Rebecca's car was repossessed because all of her credit cards were invalid. She cannot even take a taxi. I'm not sure how she gets around. We talked a bit more about business. Preliminary plans were made for an upcoming vacation to Aruba. It was a good conversation. I enrolled in an online painting course with a guy from the UK. 2 months later, one of the guys at the dock asked me to paint his sailboat. I'm not worried about cutting off my ear. Life goes on. Here is the next story. Before Jenna's behavior deteriorated, our marriage was much better. We met in college, fell in love and got married shortly after graduation. Those early years were filled with hope and dreams of starting a happy family and pursuing successful careers. However, life's pressures eventually weigh us down. Jenna's low-paying job at the university bookstore, combined with the stress of my used car dealership, took its toll. Despite the difficulties, we attempted to keep the spark alive and cherish the positive moments. Over time, the flaws in our relationship became more visible. Jenna's mood swings and irritability impacted our family life. Our daughter Carrie noticed the tension and retreated into her own world. I tried to strike a balance between work and home, but it felt like I was losing control. Jenna, once affectionate and supportive, has become a constant source of criticism and dissatisfaction. This environment contributed to our downfall. I am leaving. I said firmly, go and never return. My wife responded coldly. Normally I would have hurled an insult as I left, but today I held back. Our 14-year marriage had many fights, but I always came back. This time was different. A few days later Jenna realized I was serious. Jenna's language had become more hostile over the last 7 months. At first I didn't notice. Her biting remarks were harsh. To avoid potential conflicts, I began avoiding her. I'd stay by the car longer or return home after Jenna and our 13-year-old daughter had finished dinner. I used to fend for myself with leftovers occasionally available, but lately they ended up in the trash before I got home. My full name is David Kurt Kaminsky, but I prefer not to be confused with my father, who is also named David. My family called me Kurt. I am not a junior, because my father's full name is David John Kaminsky. He didn't name me Junior or DJ, but Kurt because DK did not fit. I'm of Polish descent and I've heard countless jokes about it. In our small town of 1,000. I'm the only person I know with Polish ancestry and I've been the target of many jokes. Returning to the main issue, I recently discovered that my soon-to-be ex-wife was not who I assumed she was. About 4 weeks ago I learned the truth. Jenna's increasingly abusive behavior had led me to spend more time away from her. After several nights without dinner at home, I decided to eat at a local restaurant on Monday night. As I sat in the booth, I overheard something that piqued my interest. I heard someone mention Paul, and then one man said, "So you've been having fun with Paul's wife for quite some time now, even before they were married." I entertained her on their wedding day, and he had no idea. I didn't recognize the first voice, but the second was George Curry, my best friend. I was stunned. George proceeded. "Yes, we get together to have sex at least twice per month. Kurt is so busy in the parking lot that he has no idea." When the waitress approached to take my order, I quietly said, "Excuse me, I have to go," and left without them noticing. I could not believe it. My wife, along with my best friend, George, served as both my best man and mechanic. He is an independent contractor who exclusively works for my used car dealership. Despite the jokes about being a used car salesman, my company is successful because customers trust me. George has always been a skilled mechanic, but he joked that he would not respect himself if he worked for a Pole. Despite this, he only worked for me, which would be his undoing. I drove around wondering if what I heard was true. Instead of hiring a private investigator, I decided to check Jenna's phone and email when she fell asleep that night. I saw nothing suspicious in her email. Her phone password, which included our daughter's birth date, revealed a few ambiguous messages, but none from George. His contact information was available, which was not surprising, given that he was my best friend. Still, Jenna's recent behavior raised my suspicions. I tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep, staring at the clock until after 2:43 a.m. The next day, George arrived at the dealership and told a joke in Polish. As he usually did, I usually chuckle and move on, but this time I snapped George. "Do you know anything about Poland? I bet you couldn't even pinpoint it on a map. You joke that all Poles are dumb, but I'm sure they could point out the United States and our state. Let us get to work." George appeared stunned, realizing he couldn't point to Poland on a map. He was never book smart, but rather good-looking and street smart, especially when it came to motors in high school. I helped him graduate by completing his homework. Now I was reconsidering my options, as well as my friends and wife. I went to my office, closed the door, and thought about how I could get proof of what was going on. Confronting them would not work. They deny this. I called a private investigator in Santa Fe, explained my concerns, and he gave me a few options. You could install a tracker on your wife's phone to determine its location or install cameras throughout the house. However, unless they are extremely good and expensive cameras, they will most likely be found. Even good cameras may be noticed if your wife is vigilant. I recommend tracking her phone and hoping to find them in a motel or something. I thanked him for his advice and offered to send the check. You do not owe me anything. All of this information is available online. I appreciate your assistance and will send the check. If you are ever in Silver City, stop by the Kaminsky dealership. I don't usually go to that part of the state, but if I do, I'll look you up. He said making people feel valued was one of the keys to my success in car sales. People need to feel important and that what they do is meaningful. I checked the tracking software and decided I could handle it. Then I saw the camera and realized he was correct. He saved me money, time and the embarrassment of purchasing visible cameras. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I downloaded a tracking app for her phone and synced it with mine. It ran in the background without her knowledge. I slept better that night. The next day at work I checked the app on occasion. She worked part-time at the university bookstore for 15-20 hours per week. She referred to the money she earned as mad money and spent it on whatever she wanted. Usually when I checked the salon, she was at the grocery store or at home. George was in and out for most of the day, but when Jenna got home, he was at work, so at least for that day, nothing happened. That evening I resolved to be nicer to my wife and daughter. I asked if they wanted to go out to eat, and my wife appeared to respond more positively. Carrie, a 13-year-old daughter, was reluctant, but eventually joined us. Dinner was pleasant. I mentioned George and Jenna quickly changed the subject, which raised my suspicions. I needed to know if George was correct. I did not check her phone that night. I couldn't see her calls or messages, so she either deleted them or didn't text at all. As I got into bed, I said thank you for agreeing to dinner tonight. Thank you, Kurt. It was a pleasant surprise. She replied. Perhaps you'll be lucky today. It has been a while, we had not been getting along lately. Jenna completed her nightly routine and snuggled up against me. I had mixed emotions about having sex with her. If she was cheating, did I want that? I decided to let her take the initiative. We eventually had sex, but it was extremely bland at the very least. I enjoyed the rest of the week checking her phone's location and discovering nothing unusual. Saturday night after she had fallen asleep, I checked her phone for messaging me or calls, but found none. I almost believed George was lying to impress someone with his sexual exploits. This wasn't the first time he'd done it. I had known him since high school. I went back to bed, but I couldn't fall asleep at 2 in the morning. I was still awake and staring at the ceiling. I got up and went downstairs for a drink, hoping that it would help me sleep, holding a glass of Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola in one hand and her phone in the other. I decided to check her phone again. I entered the password and our daughter's birth date, and it took me to the home page. I suddenly remembered how difficult Ka's pregnancy had been. My wife's body appeared to resist the baby. She had been on bed rest for the last 3 weeks to carry her to term. Carrie was born exactly 9 months after our wedding day. We were extremely happy, but she was a difficult baby, crying all the time and refusing to be breastfed. My wife informed me during Ka's second year that we would not have another child, which saddened me, but I understood because Carrie was exhausting. Wedding night babies are those who are conceived on their wedding night babies. If George was correct, Jenna could have been pregnant before our wedding night. Jenna was on the pill, but we didn't wait until marriage before having sex. The doctor stated that wedding stress may have rendered the pill ineffective. If it didn't work, it was ineffective before now. I had to be aware that there was a 50 chance. I was not the father. The phrase early bird gets the worm came to mind, but in George's case it appeared literal. I went to the bathroom, got caught in swabs and went into Ka's room. She was now a sleeper, but it had taken years for her to establish a regular sleep schedule. She snored with her mouth open, making it simple to swab the inside of her cheek without disturbing her. I placed the swab in a plastic bag and repeated the process on myself. Even if Carrie was my biological daughter, I questioned Jenna's fidelity. If she wasn't there, everything would change. Sunday was chore day and we each had our own tasks. I spent time socializing with Jenna and Carrie to avoid drawing attention to my feelings. I wanted to know the truth, but I had my doubts. Jenna inquired, "Is something bothering you, Kurt?" I quickly replied that I plan to buy a large number of cars at the next auction, so money will be tight until I make some sales. Don't overwork us. She said she always referred to the business as ours, but I had incorporated it to reduce liability. We live in a litigious society, so I wanted to protect my personal life. I considered paying off my credit cards and canceling all but one in order to improve our credit and protect my finances. "If things went wrong, whatever you think is best," she said casually. This idea came to me at the worst possible time, but if my suspicions were correct, it could help to mitigate the consequences. On Monday morning, I took my samples to Western New Mexico University and spoke with the head of the science department. They agreed to help, and I offered a 10% discount on car purchases to anyone who used the samples. He appreciated the offer and mentioned that he was considering trading in his Camry for a newer vehicle. "I might stop by to see your selection. If you don't see anything you like, let me know and I'll help you find something," I said. "Thank you, I will," he replied. I drove away from the university with a worried smile. The consequences could end my marriage. When I mentioned buying a new car to Jenna, I hid my concern. I decided it wasn't such a bad idea and invited Paul, my accountant and loan officer, into my office. "Weck. Make it work," he said. "Paul the first also want to pay off my mortgage. Can we arrange for a lump sum payment?" He replied, "I'll review the financials and get back to you." This afternoon, as Paul left my office, I considered calling my lawyer for a referral to a family attorney, but I decided to wait for the DNA results first because there was no evidence of an affair yet. In the afternoon, Paul showed me the spreadsheet and we talked about the next steps for both my plans. The next 2 days felt like the longest I'd ever waited for DNA test results. Late Wednesday night, the department called and came over with the results and to inspect a vehicle. When he arrived, I directed him to my office. His expression told me the outcome before he spoke. He confirmed that the two samples were unrelated, which I expected. The news still shocked me. He handed me an envelope containing the results. "So what kind of car were you thinking about?" I asked. He replied, "I just turned 50 and I want a sports car like a Mazda Miata. I don't have one, but I'll be at the auction tomorrow and we'll look for one in good condition. I will call you this afternoon." I reassured him as he departed. I informed Anna, my secretary and office manager, that I would be leaving early but would be available by phone. She really needed me, so I was confident she could handle things. I drove around town looking at everything differently. I called my lawyer, who directed me to a family lawyer. I made a reservation for the next evening at a restaurant. I questioned whether I had wasted the previous 15 years. I still considered Carrie to be my child, but she was not. Biologically. I knew I couldn't ignore what I'd learned. George, my best friend, and Gina would each pay. I wondered if Jenna realized Carl wasn't mine. She had kept the details of her wedding day affair with George from me. Now I believe she saw him at least twice a month. Anger had built up and I needed to be alone. I called Gina and told her I wouldn't be home that night. "Hello, Kurt." She answered, "Hey, I'm staying in Albuquerque tonight to prepare for the auction at 8:00. Lee, I said this without emotion. "Okay, have a safe trip." She replied, "I rarely go to Albuquerque for auctions, so this was unusual." I was wondering if Gina would take advantage of my absence. She'd have to explain Car's absence to my parents, which would be difficult throughout the evening. I'd check her phone tracker to see if she had gone anywhere else. I drove to Albuquerque with the intention of purchasing at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata, and arranging for transportation back to my lot. I needed to find someone reliable for mechanical inspections because George wouldn't be getting any more work from me. He'd see $signs if you were aware of the car purchases. I'd planned to keep them a secret until the last minute. I spoke with local dealers at the auction to find a reliable inspector. I arrived in Albuquerque at around 9:00 a.m. I got a room at the Best Western Hotel. Even though I owned the company, I couldn't justify the cost of a luxurious hotel. The room and bed were comfortable and met my basic needs. I checked Jenny's cell phone and found it still at home that night. I couldn't sleep because my mind was replaying everything. Why had she done this? How could she justify having sex with him on our wedding day than twice a month? For years, I began to reconsider our marriage, recognizing that it had never been perfect. I deluded myself into believing we only loved each other. The first few years after our marriage were difficult. We did not expect a child right away and intend to wait 3 or 4 years before starting a family. We had agreed to have 3 children, but Ka's difficult pregnancy changed everything when I discovered that my best friend was responsible. All of our struggles seemed pointless. 14 years of effort were wasted, despite the good times. This news overshadowed everything, leaving me wondering if Jenny's affair with George had continued throughout our marriage. If she hadn't been with him, her pregnancy might not have been as difficult and she might have desired more children. George ruined my life by sleeping with my wife on our wedding day, and he still sees her twice a month, probably laughing at my ignorance. He'd have to pay to relax. I watched a comedy show on television and by 11:00 p.m. I was ready to sleep. The auction went well. I found some great cars at reasonable prices and met dealers from around Albuquerque. I didn't see any Miatas at the auction, so I requested that other dealers add one red and one black. They agreed to make a deal once I had determined which color my customer preferred. Sure, they said, just tell us what cars you have on the lot and we'll work it out. I realized I needed to attend auctions more frequently. Networking with other professionals in my field motivated me to grow my business and took my mind off of my problems. After lunch I met with my attorney and the news was bad. I would lose half of everything and be required to pay child support and alimony, even though the child was not mine. That's when I decided against divorcing. Instead, I'd leave her with George's baby, pay the mortgage and keep the house in my name, preventing her from selling it by continuing to pay taxes and utilities. She would be unable to take the house. I also had to protect my business. It was a corporation, but I knew I needed to speak with my business lawyer to protect it. When I arrived home exhausted, I told Gina that I was tired. I'm going to take a shower and then go to bed. Do you want some dinner? She asked. No, I ate a late lunch. I responded. At least she thought to ask. The shower was rejuvenating, removing my stress. I felt like I was on the verge of solving my problems, so I fell asleep quickly after a week of stress. Having a plan. Let my mind relax. I awoke early feeling refreshed and arrived at work before Gina and Carrie. I had tasks and plans to complete. As employees arrived, I became immersed in spreadsheets, financial reports and sales projections. I informed Paul about our plans to purchase 23 cars and our upcoming deal with an Albuquerque dealer. I told Anna not to assign Jorge any additional work and to keep it confidential. She looked puzzled but said, "You're the boss." Thank you, Anna. You are irreplaceable. At 9:00 I contacted my business attorney for advice. Your company is incorporated, but she may still force you to sell it for half its worth. Have you considered selling it before? He asked. No, is it necessary? It would keep the business out of her hands. He said, this business is my life. I replied, I can't get rid of it. Okay, I will think about it and conduct some research. I'll call you at the end of this week. The news was devastating. I had poured my heart and soul into growing my business. That was my baby. Unlike Carrie, I thought anger had risen again. However, as a good businessman, I needed to compartmentalize and focus. I called Doug, the department head, and he confirmed George's claims. Doug, I've got leads on 2 murders, 1 red and 1 black. Interested if the price is reasonable, he responded. Which color do you prefer? I can bring to you to inspect and discuss pricing. Even if we disagree, I can easily sell it. Which would you recommend, he asked. Red is eye-catching, but fades quickly. Black appears elegant, but it heats up in our climate. Will you store it when it's not in use? Yes, I can, he said. Then go with red. It will not be in the sunlight much red. That sounds great. When can I see? It is Monday or Tuesday. Okay, sure, call me when you are ready. I made arrangements with the dealer to exchange the red Miata for a BMW. I have been sitting on my lot for 3 months. George arrived shortly after with several cars in need of repair as an independent contractor. He could come and go as he pleased as long as the work was completed on time. He overheard salesmen talking about the 23 cars that were coming in and asked when the auction cars would arrive. I need to schedule them. They'll be delivered late this week or early next. I said, trying to remain calm around the trader. Okay, I'll contact Anna and get on the schedule. He said. I smiled as he walked away. That weekend I kept my distance from Gina while doing yard work and errands. I did not bother checking her phone tracker. I had nothing but contempt for her. Knowing I was raising someone else's child was unforgivable. On Monday, I went to the car dealership again. I made a call to the Albuquerque dealer to arrange for the Miata's pickup. He said, great, we'll have a late lunch when you arrive. It was a nice day for a trip, so I informed Anna that I would be gone all day. Hold down the fort. I instructed her wek du boss. She responded she truly was irreplaceable. I thought I need to give her a raise. The ride and lunch were enjoyable and the host made me feel welcome. Driving the Miata back with the top down was thrilling. I chose to order a black one for myself. I needed to live a little when I arrived home in my red sports car. Gina and Carrie came out to watch it. Honey, why do you need this car? We need something with a back seat for Carrie. She stated condescendingly, I picked it up in Albuquerque for a client. I thought you might like to take it for a ride. G scoffed when I replied, no, honey, I don't like small cars. Carrie, do you want to ride? I asked. No, Dad, I've already been teased about my last name. I don't want to be seen with a Polish used car salesman. She exclaimed, stunning me. Where did this disrespect stem from? Gina acted as if Carrie had done nothing wrong. Both women in my household now treat me disrespectfully. Teenagers are not expected to be best friends with their parents, but her hurtful words made me feel as if my family life was a sham. So I'm going for another ride. I'll return later, I said, driving away angrily. My marriage was deteriorating. When I got home at 9:30, I went right to bed. Gina came upstairs and, with hallway light in her eyes, asked, are your feelings hurt because we weren't enthusiastic about the sports car? Are you not going to spend time with your family? You are not only Polish, you are also a child. George must have been responsible for her attitude. She spent time with him, and his disdain for my heritage was passed down to her, and Carrie was not my daughter. I needed to accept it. I may have to support her, but she is not mine. It sounds like you two would prefer not to have a pook around, so back off, I snapped. I was furious and her demeanor only fueled my rage. She would regret treating me in this manner. Needless to say, the Kaminsky home has remained quiet and cold ever since the next day. I called Doug and he came over to look at the Miata. He was ecstatic. We discussed the numbers and he was surprised to receive a great price, $3,000 less than Kelly Blue Book, as he was about to leave having completed the paperwork. He stated, my best friend is in charge of purchasing for the university and we change 16 cars every 2 years. I know it's not much, but could you talk to him? I'm always eager to do business and you know I'll strike a deal with them. I said I'd have Jim call you later in the week. Thank you, I responded. That's how I grew my business, by treating people well and valuing their recommendations. On Wednesday I received a call from my lawyer. Hello Kurt. I believe I have a solution for your potential problem. Would you mind stopping by this afternoon to talk about it? Of course, I cannot wait to get started. The atmosphere around my house is becoming unbearable. At the meeting that day, I listened to the plan and enjoyed it. Will take approximately 2 weeks to implement, but if it works, it will be worthwhile. During those 2 weeks, I quietly moved my personal belongings and tools from the house to an apartment in a neighboring town. During those 2 weeks, George was also eagerly awaiting the arrival of those 24 cars so that he could do some work and bill me as requested. I just put it off. This past weekend I did yard work and cleaned out the closet and dressers while Jenna and Carrie were away. Jenna did laundry during the week so that she could do whatever she wanted on weekends. It worked because she didn't notice my closet was emptying. So I went back to Monday night and told Jenna I was leaving. She was rude to me again and disrespectful to the pole and the used car salesman. I reinforced this by calling her a vulva. She despised that word. Then she exploded, and that is when I informed her that I was leaving. I used to stay at a motel for a night or two, depending on how irritated I was. On Tuesday morning following the explosion, I arrived early in the parking lot and directed my employees to the conference room. I closed the door behind them. I had weekly meetings, so this wasn't unusual. I began the meeting. Good morning. As you all know, the cars I purchased a few weeks ago arrived yesterday afternoon. They've all been inspected and prepared, so they are ready to sell right now. We no longer use George for any work. If he asks, simply tell him. We've decided to go in a different direction and leave it at that. You've all been amazing. You're like family to me, so I find it difficult to accept what comes next. I paused, wiping a tear from my eye. I sold the business. They all looked at me surprised. However, your job will remain unchanged. Well, except for Anna, you'll take over some of my responsibilities. Of course, you will receive a corresponding raise in salary. Everyone, despite their surprise, began to congratulate Anna. Everyone respected her and knew she deserved it. Anna, please meet with me after the meeting. We will go over some points. I'll still be involved, but only in a consulting capacity, and I'll probably sell on occasion. I do not want to take away any of your sales. They were all relieved that I would still be around, at least occasionally. The meeting had ended, and as we walked out, George was standing there. Why wasn't I included in the meeting? He asked. He had been present at the majority of the previous meetings. Because this is a staff meeting and you are not a staff member. He paused for a moment before saying, I see, the cars have finally arrived. I will begin repairing them right away. No, they have already been thoroughly inspected and ready for sale. Nothing should be done to them. I declared sternly. He looked at me stunned. But I inspect all of your vehicles, Kurt. What's happening, George? I sold the company and the new owner wants to go in a different direction. I explained, not wanting to escalate the situation. I realized that sometimes it was better to say fewer words. I can't believe you sold your business, he exclaimed. What should I do now? It was clear he was only thinking of himself. He was effectively out of work. So as I mentioned, you can pick up your check for the last 2 weeks' work. It was not much. Anna had only utilized his services a few times. He'd relaxed before delivering 23 cars, assuming he'd be busy once they arrived. How mistaken he was. I did not feel sorry for him. I only wanted to tell him it was because he was a traitorous idiot meeting Anna. I asked her to keep our conversation private. Of course, Kurt, you know I would never say anything against your wishes. She reassured me. Okay, here is the deal. I've formed companies in Nevada. This parking lot is bought by one company. The other purchases another company. I am the sole stockholder in both. At some point I will divorce Gina and ensure she does not inherit this business. Why? She asked. I moved out of my home. Gina doesn't know it yet, but I'm not returning. She is having an affair with George. Carrie isn't actually my daughter. I believe she belonged to George. I'm not sure Gina knows, let alone George. They will find out soon enough. I will not seek a divorce, but I will continue to pay the bills and taxes on our home. That way she can't claim. I abandoned her and took everything I own if she filed for divorce. Due to irreconcilable differences, I do not want her to be able to take over the business. That is why I have arranged for the company to be acquired twice. Let them figure out what's going on. The proceeds from the sale will be depleted by the time she gets around to finalizing the divorce. Besides, I'll make almost nothing from consulting and a few sales commissions. Anna, you are very capable of handling day-to-day affairs. I will be available to answer any questions you may have, but let me just say that I trust you and your judgment. When I told her about the new owner, she smiled again, but when she heard about Jenna and George, she appeared to be ready to shoot someone. She was a woman whom I greatly admired and respected. I continued. I have one more task for you before I leave you. I need you to order new signage and letterhead. We are changing the name of our business. This will reinforce George and Jenna's belief that the business was sold to someone else. The new name will be Graceless Auto. I spellheld the name to ensure she got it correctly. She looked at me bewildered. Someday I will tell you why I chose that name. Suffice it to say, it tells the entire story. I explained that she still looked perplexed, but trusted me enough to follow my instructions with those words. I left saying a few goodbyes to everyone. I got in my Audi and drove toward Albuquerque. After about 2 hours my phone rang. Jenna's name appeared on the caller ID. I did not expect her to call until this evening. This had occurred several times before I'd get away for a day or two. She'd call, we'd talk, and I'd get back. Things would shift for a while. Then we'd go back to our regular routine. After a while, we'd fight again and the cycle would continue. I chose to respond, expecting her usual nonsense. Hi, I spoke through the speakerphone. Kurt, what is going on? She inquired, uncertainly. Nothing. I replied, just going to Albuquerque. Why are you going there? She asked for the car. I responded flatly, indicating that what I had heard was not true. She asked. So George called her figures. Call your mistress and find out what's going on with her husband. I don't know. I replied. What have you heard? George called and informed me that you had sold the business. Why is he calling you? I asked, taking her off guard. She corrected herself. He is your best friend. He wondered if I knew what was going on. Best friend. What a joke. I was a joke for him, a stupid Pole, helpless and oblivious to what was going on behind his back with his trashy wife. I suppose my family was embarrassed that I was a used car salesman. So yes, I sold my business. You don't have to carry that stigma anymore, shouldn't? We have discussed this first. She asked, probably worried about how we'd manage. This is my company. I had it before we married and I can sell it whenever I want. I just hope that the new owner treats my former employees well. So did you get a reasonable price for it? She asked, concerned about her standard of living. It did not bother me. I knew I needed a change. I'll start looking for a new job after taking a few weeks off. I promised. How about the mortgage? She asked. Oh, use the proceeds to pay off the house. You don't have to worry about it. All we need to do now is pay our utilities and taxes. I responded. What about food, gasoline, insurance? She inquired, nearly hysterical. Oh, I suppose I am a stupid Pole. I didn't even think about them. Do you think you could work longer hours at your job? I said it with sarcasm in my voice. She was getting agitated. When are you coming home? She asked. It was the moment of truth. I am not. I spoke without hesitation. I told you last night that I was leaving. You told me not to return. So I'm not returning. Do not worry, I'll find a way to pay for all of the utilities so that the lights don't turn off. You can't do it, Kurt, you need to come back. She cried out, desperation in her voice. No, I honestly don't. I replied calmly. Kurt, do not do this. she pleaded. I already have. I replied firmly. How about your daughter? She asked, attempting to pull at my heartstrings. Do you mean Carrie, the girl who was embarrassed by her last name and the fact that her father sold used cars? I told Kurt that she's just acting like a 13-year-old girl. You cannot take it personally. She reasoned, so it doesn't matter anymore. I am not coming back, so none of you will feel embarrassed by me. I ended the conversation with those words. I hung up and turned off the telephone. Let her think about it. I knew she was trying to call me back and would be annoyed that I didn't answer. I relaxed after the call and tried to enjoy the leisurely drive to Albuquerque. I assumed her next call would be to her lover, asking for more information and telling him what I had said. When I arrived at my destination, I turned my phone back on and saw 5 messages. I listened to them all, 3 from Jenna, 1 from George and 1 from Anna. I called Anna right away. Hello, Anna, sorry, I turned off my phone. I've been receiving some unwanted calls. I said yes, I know your wife and George called me to ask where you were. I informed them that you no longer own the place, so you won't be stopping by anymore. I hope everything is fine. Anna responded perfect. I told them that if they gave you a lot of trouble, they should call the police about phone harassment. I like it. She said, Kurt, you may feel as if you no longer have family or friends, but believe me, you do. We are and will always be your family. Thank you, Anna. You knew what to say. I hope your husband understands how fortunate he is. I said, believe me. He knows. She replied. He tells me all the time, never lose that, never take each other for granted. I suggested I'm not going to. She replied. I hung up, unsure whether to call my cheating wife or the backstabbing idiot. No, I would let them handle it. I got out of the Audi and entered the dealership's office. The owner was waiting for me. I have the Audi that I told you about. Would you like to see if we can do a trade-in? I asked. Let us see. He said he was impressed with the car's condition, both inside and out as well as underneath the hood. He looked at me and said I could sell it in a week. Are you certain you want to do a trade-in? I believe I will get a better deal in the future. You can reciprocate. I am not here to make money. I replied, I am here to get a sports car. Half an hour later I was back on the road, top down, and enjoying the ride. Now I needed to decide where to go. North sounded good, so I headed to Santa Fe. I spent the next 2 weeks traveling through northern New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and Colorado. I wanted to be near Anna in case she needed me. I called her several times, and when I realized she had everything under control, I decided to head west. Sure enough, I kept receiving calls. They were initially annoyed, then apologetic, and finally downright kawaii. I listened but did not care. When I got the call that my credit card had been cancelled, I laughed until George called and told me I was a terrible person for abandoning Jenna and Carrie so easily. I laughed even harder. My lawyer called me. Jenna had threatened to file a child abandonment petition unless I contacted her. I called him back. Hey, it's Kurt, so you've been receiving threatening calls from my wife? I said yes, but I wouldn't worry about it. If you're still paying for the house, she will have a difficult time proving it. He responded, I can do something better for you. I said I have a tape of me telling her I'm leaving and she asked me not to return. That is awesome. Send me a copy, he requested. If she causes me any trouble, I'll forward it to her lawyer. Allow her lawyer to put pressure on her. Thank you. I'll call you in a week to see how things are going. I promised. I've traveled throughout the Southwest. The Miata wasn't the most comfortable vehicle, but it was enjoyable. Many people looked at me, including bored, aroused middle-aged women, but I wasn't aiming for that. After all, I was still married. I traveled to Reno, Lake Tahoe, the coast, Napa Valley, and Highway 1, which looped along the coastline. I stopped in Yos, San Diego, Death Valley, Vegas and finally Phoenix. I took my time. I stopped at parking lots, spoke with the owners and discussed various topics. Some were envious that a man in his early 30s could simply take off and travel. After traveling for approximately 3 months and 8,000 miles, I've decided to return to Silver City. I visited Rodney Auto and was greeted by my entire team. There were some new faces. They all welcomed me back. I walked into Anna's office, which used to be mine. She looked up when she noticed me. Her smile broadened. She got up, walked around her desk and gave me a big hug. We talked for a while and then I asked if I could invite everyone to Wrangler's for food and drinks. Could you please close the store at 5:00? It was 3:00 at the time and I had some errands to run. Of course I'll push for it. The whole team will be present. I said goodbye and said I'd see them in 2 hours. They were in a great mood. I went to see my attorney, who had informed me earlier that Jenna had attempted to disinherit me in order to gain control of all of my assets, but he was able to foil her plans. We discussed what to do next. At 5:00, I met the team at Wrangler Restaurant. We had a wonderful dinner and enjoyed talking with everyone. After about an hour and a half, they began their journey home. Finally, there was just me and Anna. She looked at me and said, "Kurt, you may believe you are helpless and vulnerable, but you are mistaken. You simply trust. Did those you loved?" I looked at her. "So you figured it out?" "Yes, it took me a while, but you said the new name tells the entire story." It kept me thinking until I finally figured it out. You can be Polish, but the jokes do not reflect the real you. They are an insult to you and your heritage. Thank you, Anna. You are the main reason I came back. I needed to see how you were doing with my responsibilities. I'm pleased to say that you didn't simply fill my shoes. You created your own pair. I had a wonderful mentor," she said gratefully. We hugged and she returned home to her husband. He truly was a lucky man. I returned to the apartment. I hadn't been in for 3 months. It was musty and required a thorough airing. I opened the windows and let the cool evening air enter the rooms. I grabbed a beer and sat on the deck overlooking the pool. Several people were swimming and a family was playing. Jenna and I had so many hopes and dreams when we married. Now everything was gone. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was approximately 8:30. I felt it was time for a showdown. I got up, got into my Miata and drove to my house. Technically it was still mine. I purchased it before Jenna and I got married and the deed only had my name on it. I pulled into the driveway. I was disappointed that the yard was not well kept. In fact, it appeared that the landscaping had not been touched. The lights were on, so I assumed Jenna was home. I approached the door and knocked. A minute later, Carrie opened the door. Her eyes widened as she asked Daddy, "Hey, Carrie, is your mother home?" She stuttered and screamed. "Mommy," Jenna yelled from the kitchen. Her voice strained and shrill. "What the hell is this?" She kept looking at me and responded loudly. Daddy. Jenna came around the corner, saw me and screamed. "Where the hell have you been?" I decided to respond to her shout in a calm, even tone, traveling. At that point, George emerged from the bedroom wearing only boxers. "Oh, as I mentioned, the entire family has arrived. Mom, Dad and baby, what the hell are you talking about?" Jenna was spat upon. "I suppose George moved to take my place because it was his by right." Jenna appeared puzzled. Carrie responded. "He lost his apartment after you fired him and Mom needed a man to help with bills and other chores. Since you left," you could hear the rage in her voice. "Well, young lady, it appears you have been misinformed." She disliked it when I corrected her. George was never my employee. At his insistence, I couldn't fire him. All of the bills, including the car insurance, have been paid. What about groceries and gasoline?" Jenna responded angrily. "Did you have a job? Have you lost it? I know it used to be just your mad money, but it was enough to cover groceries and gas while I was gone. So you think you'll come back and live with us right away? She asked. No, I will wait until you and your lover find your own place. It was clear they were sleeping together in my house and Carrie seemed fine with it. Jenna stated, I'm not moving out of my house. Correction, this is my house. It was mine before we got married and only my name appears on the deed. I responded, well, you left. Now it is mine. The law does not work that way, because I pay my utilities and taxes. I'm still the legal owner. Even though I was gone for a short time, I still own it. Do not worry, I'll give you lovebirds until the end of next month to find somewhere to live. Just remember to bring your daughter with you. What do you mean? Your daughter. She's our daughter. True words cannot be said. I replied with a smirk. Jenna appeared puzzled. I then turned to Carrie. I know you dislike being called Polish, so I have some good news for you. George, I am not your real father. The silence was dead after a brief pause. Jenna asked what? Yes, Jennifer, it appears that your little indiscretion on our wedding day resulted in a baby simply not mine. But Carrie, you have good news. You can now take your real daddy's surname and become Carrie. I'm curious if Mom insisted on the name Carrie in memory of her lover. I looked at Jenna, who looked at George. He was as white as a ghost. What, George? You don't want to be a dad? That's too bad. Take responsibility. Look on the bright side. It is only another 4 years then. College. Jenna and George almost spoke in unison. I do not believe it. I threw them the DNA report. See for yourself. They grabbed it, looked at it and both passed out. Carrie, inform the lovebirds that your mother will be served with divorce papers and an eviction notice next week. I turned and walked away. I wondered if the affair had continued throughout the marriage during my absence. In fact, I questioned whether she had been faithful to me at all. We met when she came in to purchase a vehicle. George was working on the car and we both thought she'd make a great date. Did she pick me or not? I was truly joyless, clueless, helpless and vulnerable. George was laughing behind my back the entire time, making Polish jokes in my face. I returned to the apartment and had a few beers. In the morning I went to my lawyer and asked him to start the paperwork. I knew I'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, but as a barely employed man I wouldn't be required to pay alimony or child support, especially since another man had already taken my place. At least that is what I hoped. I adored Jenna and George too. The betrayal was unbelievable. I'd be unable to trust anyone, male or female, for a long time. Maybe I should see a therapist. When the divorce process dragged on, I returned to work at the car dealership. However, as a salesman, I made it clear to all of the employees that I was no longer the boss and that I only needed one sale per week to cover the rent and groceries. In fact, I insisted there was only one. The court ordered child support. I wanted to have no money by the end of the month aside from my own meager living expenses. Jenna hired an attorney. I'm not sure how she could afford it. Perhaps he was doing it pro bono. He's going to be surprised. They checked my bank accounts and discovered that I had spent the funds from the sale as well as the transaction itself, but found nothing wrong. They did not dig deep enough. My co-workers informed me that while I was away, George spoke with Anna almost every day for the first 2 weeks, expressing a desire to work. She didn't mind telling him no every time. Eventually he gave in. Now he wished he had never obtained his AS certification, because the only job he could find was at Valvoline, Quick Oil Change, where he was earning $13 per hour. I hoped Jenna had switched to full-time work, or else they'd struggle to make ends meet. I contacted the realtor and informed Jenna that I was selling the house and splitting all of our possessions 50 THS. She had already received an eviction notice, so she needed to move out before the house was sold and closed one night. There was a knock at my door. Of course it was Jenna. I opened the door, looked at Jenna, and asked what she wanted. "Can we speak?" Jenna asked. "I don't think this is a good idea. We're suing each other." I replied, "Come on, Kurt, it's just me here, no lawyers. Can we sit down and have a polite conversation?" "Yeah, I suppose so, but let us go to Denny's," I said, thinking to myself, I want witnesses. I did not trust her enough to spend time alone with her. We were sitting in a booth at Denny's, and after a few minutes of pleasantries, I asked why Jenna. She looked at me, hesitated, and said, "I suppose the simple answer is that I liked you both and couldn't decide." "So you dated both of us at the same time?" I asked. She lowered her gaze to the table and replied, "Yes, but George asked me not to tell you anything, because he knew it would jeopardize your personal and professional relationships with him." "Why did you accept my marriage proposal?" I questioned. "Because I loved you." She said, "What about George?" I asked. "I also loved him, but I knew he'd never be a husband. When you asked me, he and I talked about it and ended our relationship. I wanted to focus on us and the wedding preparations." She explained, "So on our wedding day, when you allowed him to have sex, you said I'm marrying him but you're still my man." I said. She started to cry. "It was not like that," she protested. "So Jenna, what was it?" I pressed. She hesitated before saying, "I don't want to lose him and he doesn't want to lose me. You now have each other and your baby. You did an excellent job coming up with a name for her." I didn't even remember it until I had time to reflect on it. During my 3 months on the road, I said, "I didn't realize Carrie wasn't yours." "I really didn't," she said, looking at me. Then she added, "Kurt, I wanted to talk to you tonight to let you know that I still love you." "It's nice to hear you say that, Jenna, but I don't believe you understand what love is. I loved you more than anything or anyone else, but you clearly cannot say the same. I once loved you, but I can honestly say that I no longer do. I loved you with all of my heart, but now all I have is contempt for you." When I said that, she looked up at me and realized our relationship had ended. There would never be an us again. I needed to ask her another question. "Have you ever stopped?" She hesitated, then seemed to decide it didn't matter, and told the truth. We never truly stopped. We had lulls, but we got together about twice a month. I was hoping for a different response, but in any case I was relieved. She told me the truth. "One more question. What happened about a year ago that prompted you to treat me so badly?" "Your entire attitude started to change. The outward disregard became apparent." Her face turned red and she became a little angry. "George tried to talk me into having a menage a trois, but not with you. I could probably do it with you, but we couldn't figure out how. He kept insisting on it, which made me resent you for something I knew you would never do. I know it sounds strange, but I believed I could make my 2 men love me together and resented you for not being the type of man who would allow it." "So have you ever done this?" I asked. "No, I thought about it, but then you left and my entire world came crashing down. Now you can do it, knowing that I don't mind what you do. I don't care anymore." We both knew the time for talking had come to an end, so I paid the bill and we headed to our cars. 4 months later we appeared before a judge who declared us divorced. George was also there. As we were leaving the courthouse, Jenna suggested an old-fashioned drink. "Sure," I replied by this point. I no longer disliked the two of them. Then I realized that this would be the last time I had to be with them. They will now be able to spend time together alone. Let the pigs live in their own filth. They deserved each other. Jenna will have to adjust to a lower standard of living. Okay, so perhaps the hostility was not completely gone. We drove to Wrangler's Inn and walked in from the parking lot. I thought, this sounds like the beginning of a joke. This one began like this: a crooked vulva, a conniving creep and a Polish guy enter a bar. The bartender yells as we walk through the door. "Hello, we do not serve people like you here." The vulva and the creep share a look. The creep then says you can't refuse service just because he is Polish. The bartender says the Pole can stay but the health department won't. Let us keep the vulvas and crepes on display in a catering establishment. It was Gus. I offered him a great deal on a classic car that had been traded in, and he's treated me like royalty ever since. He adores his 1972 Gran Torino and treats it like a child, cleaning and polishing from the front chrome to the tail lights. I may be Polish, but I am a respectable man. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.